Every empire you see was built on a decision most people were too afraid to make. Not a grand speech. Not a perfect plan. One quiet, terrifying decision, made alone, in the dark, with no guarantee it would ever work. I've built companies worth billions. I've employed tens of thousands of people. I've launched rockets into space. And if you asked me the one decision that changed everything, it wasn't the boldest move. It was the moment I chose to stop pretending the life I was living was the one I actually wanted. There's a version of me that played it safe, that took the comfortable path, that kept the prestigious degree and disappeared into someone else's dream. He would have been fine. Comfortable. Respected. He would have been dead inside by 40. I remember sitting in a rented room, running numbers I couldn't afford to ignore, knowing that what I was about to do would either define me or destroy me. My hands weren't shaking because I was afraid of failing. They were shaking because for the first time, I was about to be completely, terrifyingly honest with myself. You know what that feels like? That moment when the comfortable lie finally becomes more unbearable than the terrifying truth? I chose the truth. I walked away from safety. And something strange happened. The world didn't collapse. It rearranged itself around the decision. But here's what nobody tells you about that moment. The decision wasn't the hard part. What came after, that's what will break you, or build you into something no one expected. And I'm still not sure which one happened to me. There's a version of you living a life that fits perfectly on paper. Good job. Stable income. People who respect you at dinner parties. A future that's been quietly mapped out. Retirement, comfort, legacy. All prepackaged and ready to receive you. And from the outside, it looks exactly like success. But late at night, when the notifications stop and the house goes quiet, something scratches at the inside of your chest. You've felt it. That low, relentless hum of a life that belongs to someone else's idea of you. I know that version of myself. I almost became him. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes not from working too hard, but from working hard on the wrong thing. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up as irritability without reason. As a kind of restlessness you can't name, but can't shake. As the feeling, somewhere around 2 a.m., that you are performing a life rather than living one. The most dangerous trap isn't failure. It's a comfortable, respectable life that slowly hollows you out from the inside. I had access to everything I was supposed to want. The credentials, the connections. The map that said, follow this, and you'll be fine. And I looked at it, really looked at it, and felt something close to nausea, because fine was never going to be enough. Not for what I could see. Not for what I felt burning in some irrational, unreasonable part of me that refused to be practical. Here's the uncomfortable truth no one likes to say out loud. Most people don't fail because they tried and lost. They fail because they never allowed themselves to want something real enough to risk looking foolish for it. They chose the comfortable lie, and kept choosing it, every single morning, until the lie became the life. Do you know what you're actually protecting when you stay safe? Not your future. Not your family. Not your stability. You're protecting your image. The version of yourself you've agreed to present to the world. The one that makes sense. The one that never embarrasses you. I spent years protecting that version of myself. And one day I realized that person I was protecting wasn't me. He was a performance. A very convincing, very exhausting performance. The night I stopped protecting him was the quietest, most violent moment of my life. There was no dramatic scene, no confrontation. Just a room, a window, a future laid out in front of me like a road I suddenly couldn't make myself walk down. And a different thought. Small. Almost embarrassing in how simple it was. What if I just didn't? What if I didn't take the safe road? What if I chose the thing that made no logical sense? The thing that people would question, that I couldn't fully explain, that had no guarantee attached to it? What if the version of me who played it safe was in fact the biggest risk I could take? That question didn't answer itself that night. But it didn't need to. It just needed to be asked honestly for the first time. And once you ask that question with your full chest, really ask it, not as a fantasy, but as a genuine fork in the road, the comfortable lie stops working. You can still choose it. Plenty of people do. But you can't choose it the same way anymore. Something shifts. Something that, once shifted, cannot be shifted back. My hands weren't shaking because I was afraid of failing. They were shaking because for the first time I was about to be completely honest with myself. The moment you decide to tell yourself the truth, the real truth, not the edited version you rehearse for other people, something strange happens to your body. You'd think it would feel like relief, like dropping a weight you didn't realize you were carrying. It doesn't. It feels like standing at the edge of something with no visible bottom. I remember the specific quality of light in the room where I made the decision that changed everything. Pale. Cold. The kind of light that doesn't flatter anyone. And I remember thinking, if this goes wrong, no one will be able to say they didn't see it coming. The numbers were brutal. The odds were absurd. Everyone with credentials and experience and good intentions had already told me, with great kindness, that this was not going to work. And yet, there's a sound a decision makes when it's finally fully real. Not the sound of confidence. Not the sound of courage. It's quieter than both of those. It's the sound of a person who has run out of excuses and is left with only what they actually believe. I wasn't shaking because I was afraid of failure. I was shaking because I was about to stop lying. That distinction matters more than most people will ever understand. Fear of failure is manageable. You can strategize around it. You can prepare for it. You can tell yourself the odds and make your peace. But the fear of finally being honest, of finally letting your real ambitions stand in the open where people can see it and judge it and potentially watch it fall apart, that fear doesn't respond to logic. It only responds to one thing, a decision that's bigger than the fear. Here's what I didn't understand then, that I understand now. The most important decisions of your life will never feel certain when you make them. Certainty is a story you tell about decisions after they work out. In the moment, you're operating on something messier, something that sounds a lot less impressive. You're operating on conviction you can't fully explain, about a future you can't fully see, toward a version of yourself you haven't become yet. And every reasonable, intelligent, well-meaning person in your life will look at that and call it recklessness. They're not wrong, exactly. But they're also not seeing what you're seeing. What are you actually seeing that they're not? That's the question worth sitting with. Because in every significant decision I've made, the ones that looked suicidal from the outside, there was something I could see that the critics couldn't. Not because I was smarter, not because I had better information, but because I was willing to look in a direction that made them uncomfortable. Focus is not about doing more. It's about having the brutality to eliminate everything that isn't the one thing. And the day I made that decision, I focused on one thing. Not on the probability of success, not on what people would think, not on the backup plan or the exit strategy or the graceful way to fail. I focused on whether this was true, whether the thing I believed about technology, about human potential, about what was actually possible, was something I was willing to stake everything on. And the answer was yes. Not a confident yes, not a calm yes, a terrified, hands-shaking, no-going-back yes. Which, I've learned, is the only kind of yes that counts. What came after, that's what will break you, or build you into something no one expected. No one photographs the part that happens after the decision. There's no cinematic moment, no swelling music, no montage of late nights that somehow looks beautiful and worth it. There's just the work, and the silence, and the specific kind of loneliness that comes from having chosen a path that almost no one around you can see the logic of. I want to tell you something about the period after the decision, the months and years that follow the moment of clarity, because this is the part that will actually determine who you become. It is not romantic. There were weeks where I couldn't see any progress, where the gap between where I was and where I needed to be looked so vast that any reasonable mind would have called it delusional to keep going. Where I ran calculations at 3 am not because I enjoyed the math, but because the alternative was lying in the dark, wondering if I had destroyed something that could have been fine. Fine. That word again. The ghost that follows you out of the comfortable life. Because here's what they don't tell you. Even after you escape the life that was hollowing you out, it haunts you. The safe path becomes a kind of mirror. Every time things get hard, and they will get hard in ways you are not prepared for, the mirror appears, showing you the version of yourself who chose differently. Sleeping. Comfortable. Unbroken. And you have to look at that reflection and choose again to keep going. Not once. Every single day. There's a specific kind of endurance required in this period that has nothing to do with strength. It's not the endurance of someone who is winning, it's the endurance of someone who doesn't yet know if they will win, but has decided that the only thing worse than continuing is stopping. Do you know how long you can sustain something on pure conviction, with no external validation? Most people find out much sooner than they expected. The collapse, when it comes, rarely looks like a dramatic breakdown. It looks like a Tuesday afternoon where you're sitting at a desk doing something that matters enormously to you, and suddenly you feel nothing. Not despair, not fear, nothing. Just a flat, gray absence where the fire used to be. I had moments like that, more than I've admitted publicly. And in those moments, there was no wisdom available to me, no insight that made the gray go away. There was only the decision I had already made, already lived with long enough, that reversing it would require its own kind of violence. So I kept moving. Not because I was strong. Because I had no other direction that felt real. There's something that happens to you on the other side of that. On the other side of continuing past the point where you expected to break. You change. Not in a way you can describe easily. Not in a way that makes for good conversation. But the work that comes out of you after that period is different. It carries something that wasn't there before. A weight. An honesty. A refusal to pretend that you know exactly what you're doing when you don't. Most people who meet you after the collapse won't know it happened. They'll see the results and assume a steady, confident arc. They'll tell stories about your trajectory that leave out the gray Tuesdays. Let them. You'll know. And that knowledge will be more useful than any of their certainty. Because the question isn't whether you're going to face the collapse. You will. The question is what you decide to do in the middle of it, when the fire goes out, and all you have left is the decision you made before the fire went out. The world doesn't reward the most talented, it rewards the ones who refuse to stop when every signal says quit. People look at the machines I've built, and they talk about genius. They talk about timing. They talk about capital. They talk about the right connections at the right moment. What they don't talk about, because it's uncomfortable, and it doesn't fit the story they want to tell, is the obsession. Not the healthy, work-life balanced, take care of yourself kind of focus that gets celebrated in productivity articles. I mean the other kind. The kind that costs you things. The kind that makes you difficult to be around. The kind that doesn't clock out, and doesn't apologize for not clocking out. AI didn't terrify me, it fascinated me. The possibility that we could build systems that think, that learn, that surpass the speed and scale of any individual human mind. That's not a threat to someone who has already decided the only interesting question is what's actually possible. But here's the uncomfortable truth that sits beneath the fascination. The most dangerous thing about powerful tools is not what they can do. It's what they reveal about the person using them. Give a distracted mind access to infinite processing power and you get infinite distraction at scale. Give a focused mind the same access, and you get something that has never existed before. The difference between those two outcomes isn't intelligence. It's not even discipline in the way people usually mean it, the gritted teeth, white-knuckled kind. It's clarity. About what you're for. About what you refuse to waste time on. About the difference between activity and direction. Focus, real focus, is not a habit. It's a decision about what you're willing to sacrifice. And most people, most brilliant, capable, talented people, are not willing to make that sacrifice. They want the results of obsession without the cost of it. They want the focus without the losses that come from focusing. The relationships you let drift. The events you don't attend. The normal life that quietly exits while you're looking at something else. I am not telling you that trade is worth it for everyone. That would be dishonest. What I am telling you is that every significant thing I have built was built in the hours that other people used for something easier. Not because I am more virtuous. Not because I sleep less by choice or skip meals as a badge of honor, but because the pull toward the work was stronger than the pull toward the alternative. What pulls you with that kind of gravity? Not what you think should pull you. Not what makes a good answer when someone asks you what you're passionate about. What actually pulls you, at inconvenient hours, in inconvenient ways, past the point of reason. Because that thing, whatever it is the only real data point that matters. The world is reorganizing itself around artificial intelligence with a speed that most people haven't fully processed yet. Industries that seemed permanent are being revised. Roles that seemed secure are being reconsidered. The edge that used to come from knowing more is shifting, fast, toward the edge that comes from thinking better. And thinking better is not a technology problem, it's a focus problem. It's a question of whether you are building something, a mind, a skill, a company, a system, with enough intentionality that it can keep up with what's coming. The relentless machine isn't the AI. The relentless machine is the person who refuses to outsource their thinking, who refuses to be distracted by every input competing for their attention, who refuses to optimize for comfort when the work demands something harder. I have been called many things, some of them accurate, some of them invented by people who needed a villain. But the one word I will accept without argument is this: focused. Not always correctly. Not always wisely. But always pointed at the thing that felt most true. I'm still not sure which one happened to me, broken or built. Maybe both. Maybe that's the only way it works. I don't know how to tell you what transformation costs without making it sound worth it. And I'm not sure it always is. That's the thing about the decisions that define you. They don't come with a receipt. You don't get to know, beforehand, what you're trading and what you're gaining. You make the exchange in the dark, with incomplete information, and then you spend the rest of your life living inside the result. There's a version of a story about someone like me that goes, he chose the harder path. He endured. He built something extraordinary, and it was worth every sacrifice. That story is true. It is also incomplete. Because the things I left behind, the relationships that quietly ended because I was somewhere else, emotionally or physically or both, those things don't disappear just because the company succeeded. They live in a different drawer, one I don't open often, but one I know is there. Transformation is not a healing, it's a becoming. And becoming something new always means becoming less of something you used to be. I used to think that was avoidable, that if you were focused enough, disciplined enough, intentional enough, you could have both. The great work and the undisturbed inner life, the revolution and the peace. I was wrong. Not in the way that makes a good lesson, just wrong. And sitting with that wrongness, not dramatizing it, not using it as a reason to slow down, but simply holding it alongside everything else, that is perhaps the most honest thing I've done. You will reach a moment, if you're moving toward anything real, where you look back at who you were before the decision, and you won't fully recognize that person. Not because you've grown so much, but because growth is lost wearing a better suit. The confidence you carry now required the dismantling of something softer. The clarity required the loss of a certain beautiful confusion. The focus required the sacrifice of a wide, open, wandering attention that used to find joy in things that no longer hold your interest. Is that grief? I think it might be. A strange, quiet grief that has no socially acceptable outlet. Because from the outside, you're succeeding. From the outside, every metric says this is exactly what winning looks like. And you don't have the language, or the permission, to say, yes, and I'm still not sure what I paid for this, or whether I had the right to pay it. What do you do with that? I'll tell you what I've done with it. I've kept going. Not because the going erases the doubt. Not because momentum is a substitute for meaning. But because stopping, turning around and trying to recover what was left behind would be its own kind of violence. You cannot unbecome yourself. Not really. You can only become something more, or become something less. Standing still was never actually one of the options. And here, at the edge of this, at the place where all 5 of these chapters converge, I want to ask you something. Not rhetorically, not as a setup for a conclusion, actually. When you imagine the decision that could change your future, the one you keep circling, the one that lives in the back of your mind at inconvenient hours, what is it you're afraid of losing? Because I think you already know whether you're going to make it. Not from confidence, not from certainty, from the fact that you're still here, still listening, still looking for the confirmation that what you're feeling is real enough to act on. It is. The only question left is what you do the moment this ends. And that question, that one isn't mine to answer.